preparing to go on our oyster farm tour. Everybody has been given waders based on shoe size. We're heading out there, just going to wade through the water. After wading out through the water, we've come out to the dining table. Looks like we've got assigned spots.
Sunset.
Yes. Seems we've got some pink bubbles coming out. And more down there. So we're actually sitting on thwarts with our feet in the water. So I've got 4 oysters, a glass of Riesling. So I've got 4 oysters, a glass of Riesling, and a dead body in a glass of blood.
Trial the Pacific oyster. The Pacific oyster, as it turns out, is not native to Australia. The version that we have here in Coffin Bay originated in Japan and was brought to this very lease in 1970 to trial in our waterways. But it's not when oyster farming started. For us, it started in the 1840s when the native Benghazi oyster, which is a flat mud oyster, was discovered in commercial quantities. Here's a couple prepared earlier. A flat mud oyster that was discovered in commercial quantities. They did it slightly different back in the 1840s, where they would get a small boat called a cutter. They would tow a large wooden dredge behind that boat, dredging the sea floor, picking up everything and anything that was down there. Probably wouldn't get away with it these days.
Thank goodness.
When they had enough oysters on the boat for the day, they would sail around the corner, hold the oysters in the shallows to keep them fresh, until they had enough to send for a bullock train from Port Lincoln. They would come out, they would load the oysters into Hessian sacks, back on the bullock train, back to Lincoln, and then sail over to Adelaide. For everyone that knows Adelaide, those oysters were then sold out of the old Weehive
flat mud oyster,
where Haigs are now at the end of Rundle Mall. Oysters in the 1840s weren't a luxury item. They were food for the common people. In fact, they used to give them to the prisoners in Adelaide jail. So if you're eating oysters in the 1840s, as it turns out, you're not actually travelling that well. How times have changed.
Yeah.
That industry was able to survive for about 50 years. But because of that continual dredging of the sea floor, not putting anything back into the water to sustain the oysters, they basically dredged themselves out of existence by the early 1900s. Roll time forward, this lease was established, and you can kind of just make out the lease. It's just under the surface there. It's a post and rail system, and the baskets are suspended between the 2 rails. That's how the French were farming. The French had been generationally farming for nearly 500 years by the time that we got involved in oyster farming. So we basically copied the French. Times have changed, I'll explain that as we go along.